Hi, my name's Marty and welcome to this video series on building your own EXP guitar kit from Guitar Kit World. In the following video, I'm going to show you how I put together this guitar. I'm going to cover all aspects of the build, including finishing, installing hardware, connecting up the electronics, and then doing a final setup. So if you've never built a kit guitar before or don't have specialist tools, don't worry, I'm not a luthier, I'm not even all that particularly handy myself. But just about anyone can put together a guitar like this with just basic tools and a little bit of patience. So the guitar we're going to be working on today is an EXP model. We've got an alder body, maple neck and fretboard, neck and bridge humbuckers, 2 volume and 1 tone, and a tunematic style bridge. Okay, so from here I'm going to take the video back to the very start of the build. I'm going to start by taking the guitar, popping it up on the bench and inspecting it for any scratches or marks. So we've got the guitar up on the bench now, and I'm just picking up the body and having a close look for any deep scratches mostly. We really want to address those early on. Prep is really important with regard to how successful your finish will be. We're not really looking for glue or any issues like that. This guitar doesn't have binding or a veneer on top, so really shouldn't have any issues other than scratches. So if you do notice any scratches, be sure to deal with them with a 120 or 180 grit sandpaper and then work your way up to about a 320. I'm just using 320 grit. Now because the headstock is perfectly flat, I'm using a hardwood block, and that way the sandpaper won't conform to any bumps. So I'm just sanding with the grain, just lightly. Don't need to press too hard. So basically whenever you're using a lighter grade of paper, you're not really trying to remove any scratches anymore, you're just removing the scratches left from the heavier gauge or heavier grit paper you used previously. So before we permanently set the neck, we want to do a dry fit of the neck. The reason we do this is to check the scale length of the guitar, check the neck angle, and also check the neck alignment. So before we insert our neck, it's important that we take a lot of care as we're pushing the neck into the neck cavity. The reason for this is, look at the edges of the neck cavity here. You realize on one side it's really quite thin and very easily chipped. So to avoid that, what we really want to do is insert the heel in first like so, and then push down. This is a good tight fitting neck. Now once that's in place, we want to check the scale length. Now for those who don't know what scale length is, it's essentially the length of the vibrating string. So the string suspended by the bridge, or through from the bridge to the nut. And on this style of guitar it should be 628mm or 24.75 inches. I've already pre-checked this one, but you should check that and just make sure it's right. If it's out by a couple of mil, don't be too concerned. The saddles are able to be adjusted to allow for that. Okay, so the next thing to do is check the neck alignment. Now, you really only need to do that if there's some play in the neck itself. This neck's in really quite tight, so I'm comfortable that the alignment will be correct. But if it was a loose fitting neck, what you would want to do is measure and make a mark halfway across the neck there, and measure between the two pre-drilled holes for the bridge. Draw a line, just make sure that's aligned. Now the next thing to do is check the neck angle. Now you can insert the bushings and the posts for the bridge if you like, but what I like to do is just let the bridge just sit like so. Make sure that the neck's in correctly. And taking a straight edge. Just make sure that that's just sitting above, which it is in this case, so we can move on. Okay, now we've dry fit the neck, we can comfortably, or confidently I should say, permanently set the neck. Just clear out the neck cavity. Sometimes it'll be sawdust or even polystyrene from the box the guitar came in. Just clean that all out. Make sure the back's clean as well. And we use some PVA, or this is Aquadia, but a similar product. What we're really just trying to do is apply enough glue to the bottom of the neck cavity to have a nice even coating. And the other thing I like to do is put a bit of glue on the heel of the neck as well. Just make sure that's on nice and evenly. Once that's in place, just as we dry fit the neck before, insert the heel first. Make sure that's nice and all the way into the cavity. And then we'll need to clamp the guitar. What I've got here is fine buffing oil. It's a Feast Watson product. It's just a mixture of oils and waxes. Now what I'd first do is shake that up and just seal up. And next thing I'd just quickly do as well is just mask off that neck. Just take a clean rag, obviously, put some on the rag and just begin to apply. Just really work it into the grain. And as you can see, we've got a nice golden sort of natural look to this guitar, which I think will look really good once there's some chrome hardware on there. So what I'll do next, leave it about 20 minutes till it's tacky, then I'll just come along and wipe off any excess, and then we'll look at doing the sides and the back. In about 15 minutes, so what I'm going to do now is just come along with a clean rag and just wipe away any excess. Once that's done, I'll leave this guitar to dry for about 5 hours, I'd say, and then come along and see if we need a second coat, which I'm thinking we will. Okay, so I've got the EXP body up on the bench now for the final coat. So first thing I want to do is shake up this oil. Now I've got a clean rag here. What I suggest doing is folding the edges in so you don't have any of the frayed areas. Just fold into a nice workable square like that. Now I've also wiped down the guitar. Obviously you don't want any dust or any debris on the surface when you're applying an oil finish like this. Hopefully that's in view. I just want to make sure that that's tied up against the timber. Now we'll also mask up those tuning peg holes and the truss rod. It's really important to just make sure no gunk gets inside that truss rod and affects the functionality of the truss rod. So I'll do that off camera. Next step from here, we'll be adding a prime coat, probably 2 prime coats, and then we'll follow that up with some solid black. I'm going to do this inside. I normally spray outside, but it's a pretty windy day. There's a fair bit of dust flying around, and this is a relatively small spray job. So I've just got it sitting in a box to catch any overspray. I'm using an acrylic enamel primer. This is Rust-Oleum 2X. So once you hear the rattle of the ball, you just generally shake it up for a minute. I've already shook this up for about half that off camera, so I'll just follow up quickly. When we're spraying primer, important just to have the can on an angle and just work in strips. So as I said, it's a relatively small job, but we'll just spray from the top, work our way down, and each run will overlap by about 50%. As I said, I'll be doing 2 coats, so it doesn't matter if the first coat doesn't get full coverage. I'll be following that up, and the second coat will adhere nicely to the first coat. Now, it's also important that you do your coats while the previous coat is still a little tacky, so it adheres nicely. So what I'll be doing is doing 1 coat, waiting about 5 to 10 minutes, and following that up with the second coat. And just same as the first coat, so we're just doing long runs, overlapping by about 50%. Just work my way across. And I generally leave the first coat probably at that, and then follow up with a second and third heavier coat, and should get good coverage that way. What I'd recommend from here is sanding that flat, but using staying at about a 400 grit paper, and you know, not really needing anything lower than that. It's a nice flat surface to sand on, so what we're really trying to do is just sand it dead level. So keep that sanding paper nice and tight on the sanding block. Definitely use a sanding block. So as I'm sanding, I'm going to keep checking my work. If I hold the headstock up to the camera now, you can probably see some areas that are shiny and some areas that are not. So the areas that are shiny means the sandpaper hasn't affected yet, so it's not dead level. So the areas that are now looking a little bit like that shine's been removed, the sandpaper's actually affected that. So we're trying to get that dull appearance basically over the entire headstock without sanding through. So hence the high grit paper. Just doing long runs from the bottom to the top. I'll be doing 3 coats. So as explained previously, the fine buffing oil product I've used on this EXP guitar kit is a combination of tung oil and wax, which means we can buff the finish. So what I'm going to do is start buffing a section on this guitar, and we'll pick up video again once I've made a bit of a difference. But when it comes to buffing, it's pretty much you know, as you'd polish a car. Okay, so I've been buffing this for about 15 minutes now. I'm hoping you can start to see that slightly glossier front. As I said, I've done the top and not the sides. You can probably see a bit of a difference straight away there. That's basically how you buff out a wax finish. It's one of the easier finishes to apply. Certainly a lot less messy, and can be done relatively quickly. So all in all, it may not offer the same protection as a paint or something more durable, but yeah, it's a good option, especially if you're just new to this whole process. So we're just about through the finishing stage of our EXP guitar kit. The last thing we need to do is just seal this neck. You know, oils from our hands or anything, you know, dirt, any residue on our hands can end up on our fretboard, obviously. So most of the time a maple fretboard like this is sealed. Rosewood fretboards typically are not. So we're going to need to seal this. What I'm going to do is just wipe on an oil. It would be better to do this obviously if the frets weren't in the neck already, which is why this sort of job's always normally done beforehand. And just wipe directly onto that fretboard. So I'll come back in about 10 minutes and just wipe away any excess that hasn't absorbed into that neck. May do a second coat, which will be much the same as the first. Okay, so now we've completed the finishing stage of our EXP guitar kit. The next thing we need to do is start installing some hardware. So the first hardware component we're going to have a look at today are our strap buttons. Strap buttons are responsible for keeping our guitar secure when we're using a strap around the shoulders, and also the location of the strap buttons themselves has a lot to do with the balance of the guitar when you've got a strap on and you're standing up playing. First thing we need to consider is placement. Now on an EXP style guitar, normally there's a couple of different positions you might see them. You might see the strap button on the bottom halfway or about a third of the way down, and the front strap button you might see on this top horn, or alternatively you will also often see it positioned just here in the center of the neck heel. Now I'm not as big a fan of that myself, because I feel like the strap, it's almost getting lifted when it's coming across that part of the body, but a lot of people do favor that, so something to keep in mind. I'd suggest just researching what's going to be ideal for you. In this case, we're going to install the strap buttons a third of the way down from the top of the guitar and center of that top horn. So you might be wondering why I've got green tape on the guitar. The tape's used basically to mark instead of marking directly onto the timber. So if you've got a lead pencil, for instance, and you need to make a mark for some measurements, just use some low-tack painter's masking tape. Make sure you get the low-tack stuff. It won't remove any finish when you're taking it off. In any case, so we're going to work on this one about a third of the way down and this one in the center of this horn. So first thing we need to do is get an approximate measure. So we're about 40 centimeters. So I'm going to come down about 15 centimeters from this top, and I'm going to pretty much just eyeball center here and then measure using my set square. I'll then measure down halfway and make a mark. So the way to make a mark, one thing I use is I've just got this precision screwdriver that I've ground the top away, but anything sharp like that you can make an indentation. So I'm going to go down 20, then I'm going to use my pencil just to quickly mark that spot. Then I'm going to indent that spot, and then I can remove my tape. I'll do the same thing on the other side. And the body, when I said 20 before, the depth of these bodies is generally 40 mil. So then the next thing we need to do is drill pilot holes. So anytime you're installing hardware on an electric guitar that the holes aren't pre-drilled, I would suggest drilling pilot holes first. And the reason for that is these screws, well, they're a little bit larger on the strap buttons, but the majority of the screws you're going to be screwing into the body are really quite small and fragile, so they're easily stripped. So we need to take a couple of precautions to prevent those screws being stripped. So the first thing we need to do is drill pilot holes on every hole, every screw hole we're going to make on the guitar. So what I recommend is use a drill bit that's approximately 2/3 the thickness of the screw you're going to drill. And you might also notice I've got this blue tape on the drill bit here. I did. The reason for that, I'll just cut some new tape. The reason for that is to give me an indication of depth. So if drilling pilot holes, I would normally suggest drilling to 2/3 depth, and that's very difficult to work out. But if we've got some tape, we can simply measure that against the screw. Now, one mistake people often make is they measure 2/3 depth of the entire screw, but as you can see, as part of this strap button assembly, we've only got 2/3 of or half the screw really going into the timber. So we really just want to make a comparison there. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera, and put some tape approximately 2/3 of the way down the drill bit. And once that's done, you've got a depth indicator for your drill. And from there we can drill our pilot holes. So nothing too complex. We're just looking to keep the drill as straight as possible. And now another thing you might like to do, I'm not so concerned on this guitar, it's an all finish, so it's not going to have this problem, but if you had a painted guitar, for instance, what can happen when you install these screws or take them out is the paint can chip around the edges. So one thing you can do is chamfer the holes. So I'll just do this using a relatively small drill bit, and I'll just put it in the edge of the hole like that and just lightly chamfer the edges. Just a quick tip with your truss rod cover installation. If you want a quick way to align that dead center, just put some tape on the truss rod on the bench, find center on the truss rod, mark the tape, and then just using your using a rule, just align that line up to that middle line. Once that's in place, press down the tape. That'll keep the truss rod cover in place, and then you can mark out your holes. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is install our tuners. I've already got these three loosely in place. So basically, this is a set of 6 inline tuners, so we don't need to separate them out from left to right or anything like that. They're not staggered posts either, so the order doesn't really matter. So it's simply just a case of the washer going on first, followed by the bushing, and just hand tightening. And when you've got that in place, you can either square that off using a set square or align those up with a steel rule if you don't have a set square handy. And as we've done all the other holes on the guitar, just mark out with a scribe of some sort, and then drill your pilot holes, and your tuners will be installed. Okay, so our next job is to install the bridge. We'll be installing a Intonating bridge on this guitar. Bushings go directly into the hole like so. The posts are then screwed in place, and the tailpiece is fixed in place like that. Now they're all height adjustable, so the tailpiece is height adjustable, and that's really just to adjust the breakpoint angle or the break angle of the string coming off the bridge, and the bridge is obviously height adjustable to adjust your action. So first thing we need to do though is get our ground wire in place. So when we're doing the electronics later, we're going to need to ground the signal. So that's generally grounded out against the bushing that's closest to the electronics cavity. So yours may already be pre-drilled. I've just drilled this earlier, but generally you want to take great care when you're doing this. Make sure you've got a long, thin drill piece, but it's thick enough, it's thick enough to handle the wire, and definitely have something under the drill that can just protect it from scratching, and just drill very carefully and very slowly. Basically what you're trying to do is drill into this rear electronics cavity. As you can see, got the hole just coming in just there. But again, be very careful with that, and use as long a drill bit as you can manage. Once you've got that hole drilled, you'll need to find there should be one lone wire in your package, and that's generally that ground wire. You'll just thread that through there for now. And from here we need the bushing to sit hard up against it. So bend that back from now. Little hook at the end. Just slowly feed it through while you're pushing and you're bushing. Now they'll sometimes be quite firm. Sometimes you'll be able to get them in by hand. If you need to give them a little bit of encouragement, obviously first definitely unscrew them. They'll often come like this. And definitely use something between a hammer and the top just to protect the top, or use a rubber mallet. Of course, before that, just clean the holes out as well. You may find there's just some gunk that's built up in there from the finish if you didn't mask well, and you can normally clean it up. Next, we've got, so these are the posts for our tailpiece, and they go in like so. And these are the posts for our bridge, which go in like so. So generally screw those all the way down to start with. And the bridge generally has the adjustment, the intonation adjustment screws facing inward. It just sits on over the top like so. And the tailpiece sits in there and is kept in place from the tension of the string. So I wouldn't leave that there until you've got the strings in place. But we will be installing our 2 E strings next, and that will help us align the humbuckers. Okay, so next we're going to install our pickups. So you can generally have a look on the back, and you might see neck or bridge written. We don't in this instance. We've got FC50 and FC52. And it looks like FC52 is our bridge pickup. As you can see, the pickup ring's got a higher profile, and that means our red wire is the bridge pickup. So you might notice I've got the high E and low E loosely installed. So I've just got them loose for now just to get these pickups in place, but just tight enough to not let that tail piece fall out. And the wires obviously go, the corner goes closest to the electronics cavity. Same thing, but you'll see there's a hole just to the side here. So that'll be going through first, which is why we haven't threaded or fully installed our bridge pickup yet. And the neck pickup will probably have to come out again anyway, just to install the pickup selector, but I just want to get those holes drilled for the pickup rings first, just to make sure we've got them aligned. Okay, so now we'll tighten up our strings, make sure they're sitting on the saddle correctly. And there's a little bit of play there, so what I'm going to do is just make sure our strings are aligned over the individual pole pieces as well as possible. And mark our holes. And that's really all there is to it. So then you would square off your bridge pickup, off your neck pickup, and follow the process. Okay, now we've got the hardware installed in our guitar. The next thing we need to do is connect the electronics. So just to explain, if you're not familiar with how guitar electronics actually work, what we've got is a pickup. That pickup generates a signal, and the way it does that, it's essentially a series of magnets surrounded by thousands, I think almost 7,000 individual strands of copper wire, and that creates what's known as an electromagnetic field. Now when something magnetic is vibrated above that, like a guitar string for example, it disturbs that field and creates an alternating current. And that alternating current runs through these wires where it eventually is connected to the input jack. So we've got one ground wire and one active or hot wire, and they connect to their individual lugs, and when we plug a cable into the input jack to the amplifier, the voltage is converted to sound because both use frequencies. So for instance, different voltages have different frequencies, different pitches have different frequencies as well. Now these other components, the switch, the pickup selector switch, volume pot, tone pot, they don't actually add anything to that signal. They just allow us to manipulate it. So when it comes to a switch, for example, if we switch to the neck position, we're activating the wires that are connected to the lug on the neck position. Alternatively, bridge, we're activating this lug. And in middle position, we're activating a combination of both pickups, as you can see here with that middle lug. Now that will eventually run through our volume potentiometer or pot. And a pot, the potentiometer is essentially a variable resistor. So inside that pot we have resistive material. And this middle lug, which is the output, is actually connected. It has a wiper that's connected to that resistive material. So if we turn a volume right up, we're directing less of that voltage to ground. If we turn a volume right down, we're directing we're directing everything to ground, then we would have no volume. Now tone pots work, well, they're exactly the same except we add a capacitor. So as you can see, coming from the output lug, which is the middle lug, and then running to ground, we have a capacitor, which is essentially a filter. So as that voltage runs through there, it will only allow high frequencies to pass through, and those high frequencies then run to ground. So that's essentially what happens when we turn down our tone. We're not actually adding anything, we're just removing those higher frequencies. Okay, so when it comes to soldering, you're going to need a few things obviously. We're going to need a soldering iron. Now if you're just wiring up one guitar, a cheap soldering iron will probably do the job. If you plan on working on more than one guitar, for example, I'd probably get something with at least some more temperature control and a good solid base. You're also going to need solder, obviously. Now your guitar kit will come with more than enough solder to complete the job. And the last thing I'd recommend keeping on hand is just a damp sponge. And we use that just to keep the tip of our soldering iron clean. And when we're soldering, it's important that we tin the soldering iron and we tin the components. And what that really means is we're just giving a light coating of solder to the iron and to the different components, and that will help with connections. It will also help the tip of our soldering iron from becoming oxidized, which means when the tip becomes oxidized, it's difficult for solder to stick to it. It tends to ball up and become more difficult to work with. Now the other thing with soldering, if you haven't done any soldering before, it's not the same as gluing something together. We're really transferring heat. So we have solder on our very hot iron. Then we need to transfer that heat through the wire to the actual lug we're connecting it to. And once that lug's hot enough, the solder will take to that connection. Essentially, if the soldering iron's hot and these elements are cold, the solder doesn't want to leave the iron. So just keep that in mind. You need to warm up your lugs for a couple of seconds first. Okay, so before we get into actually turning on the soldering iron, the first thing we need to do is run our pickup selector wires from our pickup selector cavity into our control panel cavity, which is just through here. Now, when you're wiring up an EXP style guitar, you need to do things in a certain order, and that's because we can't run these pickup selector wires through these cavities when the pickups are in place. So we need to get these in place first. So what I'd normally do is just mask off the end so they're easier to push through. And I generally come from the neck pickup cavity rather than coming from the pickup selector cavity. Much more difficult to thread from the other direction. And as mentioned, I've selected these colours. Black is usually used as a ground. Green is going to be my output from the pickup selector. And then I've got white and red. I've got a red wire coming from my neck pickup, which will coordinate with this red wire coming from the neck position pickup selector lug. You can see this is red also, but I'm just going to reference the hot wire inside. So the active wire in this case has white shielding for the bridge. The active wire on the neck pickup has red. So that's why I'm using white and red here, just to coordinate those colours, because once the pickups are installed, it's going to be difficult to know which wires are which. Okay, so I'm just threading those through. Once I've got those in place, I'm just going to mask those off as well so they don't come back through. And you can see too, these wires are long, and they need to be long because the Explorer body is quite long itself. The next thing I'd recommend from here is taking those 4 wires and combining them with the neck pickup wires. Masking those off as well, just like so, just to make it easier to poke them through the hole. Now there'll be a hole just to the side of your neck pickup cavity. Just push those wires through like so. And just make sure you've got that wire facing the right way. So the higher side of the pickup ring will be facing towards the back. Now from here, we're going to pick up our bridge pickup. So you can see the bridge pickup sits here, the wire's closest to the hole in the bridge pickup cavity. I'm also going to try and tape this up. I'm not sure if the hole is going to be big enough to allow, but we'll see what we can get away with here. Okay, so now I've got all those wires connected. I'm just going to push them through that hole there. I'm just quickly going to install that neck pickup as well, just so we can turn the guitar over without having to hold 2 pickups as we do it. Okay, from here, just holding this pickup, I'm just going to tip the guitar over. And you can just see the edge of that wire tipping through there, so I'm wondering if I can grab that with the needle nose pliers. Okay, so now we've got our wires through. I'm just going to mask those together now, just so we don't lose track of which is which. So these are the wires coming from our pickup selector. This is our bridge pickup. These two are our neck. last we have our ground, and that's the ground we installed earlier against our bridge, against the bushing for the bridge post. Next thing, I would start warming up my soldering iron. So one of the first things we'll do is connect our pickup selector. So I'm just turning the guitar over again, and I'll install that pickup while I'm waiting for the soldering iron to heat up. Okay, so next, just taking the pick guard, you want to install the pickup selector like so. So the side facing up will be the chamfered holes. Just push that through like so. And put the washer in place and the nut over the top. And I'd also suggest just putting down some sort of protection for the guitar. Okay, so first thing we want to do is just quickly tin our soldering iron. So as I said, we just want a thin coating of solder. We're really just looking for a thin coating of solder on the iron like so. Now I'd also tin these lugs. So what you want to do there is just hold the iron on the lug for a couple of seconds. And just put a very small amount of solder on there. Remember, you need to heat that lug up for a second first. You don't need to use a lot. Okay, so the first connection I'll make will be the ground wire. So again, just heating that lug up. So I might do the output wire first. It's probably going to be a little easier to access. So the green wire is our output. That's going to the middle lug. That needs to thread through two lugs that are actually connected. Just let that one cool as well. And our last wire is our bridge pickup. Okay, so one of our next jobs is to ground out our potentiometers, our two volume pots. Now, you can pull back the lug onto the back of the shield and solder it in place. I used to do that, but I found it's a little tidier now just to use a short wire. So the way to go about this, the ground lug is the one on the right. So what I normally do is thread that through first. I've already tinned that wire. So what I'll do first, just put a little puddle of solder in this case. I'll just do the second volume pot. Okay, so from here, I'm going to call this my neck, and this my bridge volume. Just going to connect my red wire up first. And these will be getting connected to the middle lug of both volumes. So take the red wire, insert it in the eyelet of the middle lug. Again, I'm just going to apply some heat to that lug first. And the white will go to the middle lug of the bridge pickup volume. Wait for those to cool and just test. Okay, they're both on well. So next I'm going to run the ground from the pickup selector just to the nearest volume pot, which in this case happens to be the neck. Okay, that's our ground in place. Now we're also going to need to connect that bridge ground to the nearest pot as well. In this case, I would say the bridge volume may be the best option. It doesn't really matter which, as long as it's connected to the ground circuit. And hopefully I can reach that there. Okay, so one of the next connections we need to deal with is the output from our pickup selector to the active lug of our input jack. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is wire up this input jack. So if we look closely at the input jack, you can see that there's a lug connected to this inner sleeve, and that is our ground. The hot lug is the lug that's connected to the arm here that holds the cable in place. And when I put a cable in, you can see that we've got a rubber ring separating the tip, which is connected to the hot wire, and the base, which is connected to the ground. So based on the color codes we've been using, I'll be tinning and connecting this black wire to the ground lug. And as I said, the ground lug is the one connected to the inner sleeve. So just apply some heat there. So they cool and test the connection, that's fine. Then obviously our green wire is going to our active or hot lug. Okay, so one of the next connections we need to deal with is the output from our pickup selector to the active lug of our input jack. So I do this, generally connect these through the ground of the tone, which is the closest to the input jack. So I'm going to just connect these two wires up. And I'll just run a small bit of solder onto those to tin them. Now for now, I'm going to connect these up, as I said, through the ground lug of the tone. So that's the leftmost lug. So it's facing this way, for instance. It would be on the right. So I'm also going to ground the input jack to the back of the tone pot. We can now put that tone pot in place. And I'm going to go ahead and just tighten that one up, just so it's dealt with and out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and just tighten that one up. Okay, so next I'm going to run the bridge pickup wires to the bridge volume. So the shielded wire, the active wire, goes to the input lug, which is the lug on the right if it's facing away. I'm just going to put it through the eyelet there like so, bend it back. I'm just going to push that lug down so it's easier to access. Okay, and the next wire will be from the neck pickup. Okay, so unfortunately the video cut out there, but what I've since done, I've connected the ground wires from both pickups to the back of their respective volume pots. Now it doesn't matter which, but they're more convenient, they're more accessible. So I've run the ground from the bridge pickup to the bridge volume, and then I've connected my ground circuit. So this black wire I've added to the bridge volume pot will run to the tone pot. I'll cut that shorter, tidy that up a little bit, and that will then connect those two components. And I will run this wire in connection with the neck pickup ground, and I'll connect those both to the back of this volume pot. Okay. Okay. Okay, so from here, you're going to need to obviously be very careful not to damage the finish. I just want to get that wire connected to that small puddle of solder there. Okay, so from here we can put our pots back in place. So just remembering which is which here. So we know that the red was our neck and the white was our bridge. Okay, so from here I'm just going to turn off my soldering iron and we'll test, run a quick test just to make sure those pickups are working. Okay, so neck pickup. Really just need to tap the magnets there. Okay, we're good. Bridge pickup. So bridge volume's working. Neck volume's working. Just check middle position as well. Okay, so pickups seem to be working. Okay, and then rather than risk scratching up the back of that control panel, I would just use some painter's masking tape, press it right on. It should pick up that plastic covering. There we go. Okay, so these volume and tone knobs, they just press on. Some have a small adjustment screw on the side, but these don't appear to, so they will just press on in place. And that's all there is to it. So from here, as I said, I'll string up the guitar and then we'll perform a final setup. So I'm going to go through a very basic setup here. You'll probably want to come back to this after you've played the guitar for a little while and make further adjustments. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is make sure the guitar's in tune. We need the correct amount of tension on the neck. It's also important you do a setup in the correct order. So you wouldn't want to adjust your intonation before we're making major changes to the neck like this. Okay, so the way to check the amount of neck relief you have, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can run a steel rule between the D and G strings. But perhaps a more intuitive way to do it is just to fret at the first fret and the last fret and then tap down at the 12th fret. And you can see we've got some movement there. If that string wasn't, if it wasn't able to be moved down at all, if it was laying flat, we'd need to introduce more relief to the neck. I'm going to introduce a little bit more relief to this neck. Now obviously if the action was too high, we'd need to flatten the neck out. So the way to adjust the straightness of the neck is to use your Allen key that's included in your packaging. You'll probably find that in the same bag as your cable. And as I said, because I want to introduce more relief to this neck, it's a little too flat, I'm going to want to turn this counterclockwise. I'm going to just turn it about 1/8 of a turn to start. So just work in small increments. I also want to just check the tuning again too. Okay, so now okay, there's a little more clearance there. So you'd adjust that as per your preferences. The next thing we want to look at is the action, which is the height of the strings from the fretboard. If you're not sure a good starting point, I would suggest 2.4 mil on the low E measured at the 12th fret and 1.6 on the high E measured at the 12th fret. Now the way to measure that is just use a steel ruler or a string action ruler like this one, and you want to put the ruler on top of the fret, and you're measuring from the top of the fret to the underside of the string. If you wanted to make adjustments, you would turn the post at the bridge here. This is how you'd adjust action on a Intonating bridge like this. And you would turn this, just make small adjustments as well. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is check the intonation. So intonation is essentially making sure the guitar is in tune with itself. So if you look at the bridge here, you'll see it's on an angle. Now it's angled to compensate for the additional mass of these strings. Now we can make further minor adjustments by adjusting these individual saddles on the bridge itself. So to check intonation, first we want to make sure we're in tune again. Okay, now I check at the 12th fret, an octave up. Just make sure you're hitting that string with the same attack as you're hitting the open string. As you can see, we're just a little sharp. So if you're a little sharp, what you need to do is increase the vibrating length or the scale length of that string. So you'll see here, I've got intonation screws, intonation adjustment screws. So we'll just turn that counterclockwise to push that saddle further back, and that would increase the length of the string. The first point of contact for the strings is the saddle and then the nut. So the scale length is measured between those two. So we've just increased the length of that string. Now I'll just get in tune again. So we'll bring the camera around now. You can see we're just still a little bit sharp, so I'd still need to adjust that a little bit further. Now the last thing I would check is pickup height. And again, this is fairly subjective. It depends on what you're hearing really, but a good starting point is about 2.4 mil on the bass side and about 2 mil on the treble side. Now the way you check this, you actually fret the last fret on the neck, and you're measuring from the actual individual pole pieces to the underside of the string this time. So you can see that's way too high, so I'm going to bring that down. You just adjust at the mounting screws. You've got to get the balance right between those two screws just to make sure that the pickup will sit flat also. So if one's a little bit loose and one's not, you're going to find that won't sit flat. And again, just get down to eye level, fret at the last fret. And you're looking for 2.4 from the magnet to the underside of the string. That's pretty much how you would go about doing a basic setup. As I said, you'll probably want to come back and make more adjustments after you become more accustomed to the guitar and the neck after playing it for a while. But yeah, from here we're going to test the guitar. So unfortunately I'm left-handed, so it's a little difficult for me to do a thorough demonstration of the sound of the guitar, but we will just check the pickups quickly. Okay, so just checking bridge position. Bridge volume is working. You can hear our tone changing there. So middle position, which is a combination of both humbuckers. We can hear both volumes are working. And lastly, neck position. We see our neck volumes are working correctly. Okay, so the next thing I would do is turn the guitar as loud as possible on your volume and just take your hands away from the guitar. Now hopefully you're not hearing any electrical interference or hum. This guitar's fairly silent, which is good. And if you did hear any interference or hum, what you're probably looking at is an issue with your ground circuit. So I would go back into the electronics cavity and just have a look at those black wires we soldered up earlier. You may find one's gotten loose or there's a loose connection somewhere. Okay, and the last thing I would do is just check the neck itself. So I'd play up and down the neck, play each string, play each fret, all the way up and down the neck. And what you're looking for there is any signs of fret buzz or any dead notes. And if you do come across anything like that, you know you can then adjust the amount of neck relief or adjust the action to try and counter that. Okay, so that's the end of the project. I hope you've enjoyed building your guitar as much as I have. Thanks for watching.